Father Thomas Petri is a Dominican friar and theologian. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, Father Petri, what was your overall take on the Holy Father's first celebration of the Easter Triduum as Pontiff?
Well, I think anytime there's a new pope, we're always going to look carefully at some of these more solemn celebrations. And there's nothing more solemn than the Triduum, Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and Easter Sunday. And even many of the gestures he made, such as celebrating the Mass of the Lord's Supper on Thursday back at the Lateran Basilica, washing the feet of 12 priests, brings the ceremony back to what is, in fact, a more traditional aspect. And I enjoy the fact that 11 of the 12 priests were priests that he himself ordained to the Diocese of Rome, to the priesthood last year. So it's a great sign of the servants, of the service of Christ to us, but also the servant of the servants of God, the Pope.
Now, if you could just talk a little bit, you had mentioned that we saw the Holy Father carrying the cross and doing a lot of, as you said, these gestures in a media savvy and, of course, tech heavy world that we live in. For people of the Catholic faith and all faiths to be able to see this, whether it was on television or if it's on social media, how important do you think that is in the times that we're living now?
I think tremendously. We know that Pope Leo the 14th, certainly before he was Pope, and I would suspect perhaps even now, was very savvy on social media. He understood the optics sort of intuitively. He's also just a very good person, a very good preacher. And so I think we're seeing in him, the use of various vestments, the use of various gestures like carrying the cross during the Good Friday procession, which the last pope to do that was St. John Paul II in the 1990s. And so having him do that, he's also a younger pope. Pope Benedict was 78 when he was elected, and Pope Francis 76. Pope Leo was 69 when he was elected pope. He's just turned 70 in this past year. And we know that he's also very physically active and maintains a very strong exercise regimen in his life.
Now, in addition to those acts, of course, we focus on his message, and Pope Leo did highlight some of the current conflicts that are happening in Iran and across the globe. What was his message?
Well, one thing I appreciate about Pope Leo is that his homilies are classic homilies in the sense that the Church Fathers and the Church has always understood the homily, which is he begins with identifying the reality of Christ, the primacy of grace, the first things that Christ has done for us, for the world, for history, and then our response. So he even mentions, for instance, that God's love is not a reward simply that we get for accepting his mercy. Rather, his love comes to us first. And it's because he loves us and forgives us that we're actually able to respond and to accept his mercy and his love and to move forward in life as Christians. This, of course, comes at a time when the world is very divided and there is violence and war. During his Urbi et Orbi message yesterday, he mentioned the globalization of indifference, the indifference that we have, even good Christians and good Catholics have to violence. We've been desensitized to it. But if Christ has shown us anything, it is that power, the all-powerful God, wins the battle against sin and death, not by violence or defeating it in some grand gesture of war against evil. Rather, he abandons himself. He gives himself in service. He dies for it, and then he rises for it without losing an ounce of his dignity, an ounce of his power. And Pope Leo challenged us to live in that sort of same grace, not to be disturbed by the problems of the world, but at the same time, not to be indifferent to them, that we can coexist in peace and serenity, and at the same time still be troubled and upset and concerned about what we see, not only in our own sinfulness in our own lives, but in the church and in the world.
Now, Pope Leo announced that on April 11th, he will hold a peace vigil at St. Peter's. What is the goal of having this, and how usual or unusual is it?
Well, popes always call for peace, and it might be easy to dismiss that. Well, of course, he's the pope; he's going to call for peace, and he's going to be against war. But remember that the Pope is not simply a moral figure. He's not simply a great teacher. He is, in fact, we believe, the vicar of Christ on earth. And the teachings of the church, the teachings of Jesus Christ himself, in fact, argue and maintain that peace and nonviolence is ultimately the way to everlasting peace. And obviously, only in the grace of Jesus Christ will we find justice, peace, and forgiveness and love all coexisting and living in one reality. And so this vigil for peace is certainly certainly important, and is certainly significant that the Pope has called for it. But it's also a real pleading, not simply that people will lay down arms and be peaceful with each other, although it is that, but that God himself will give peace to the world that is so desperately in need of it.
Now, people are dealing with so many struggles from all walks of life around the world. What advice would you give to them to get the most out of the Easter season?
Well, I would give probably the same advice that Pope Leo gave during his Easter Sunday homily, when it was the Vigil Mass homily, when he spoke of the stone being rolled back and how the women expected the stone at the Lord's tomb to block their access. But when they got there, it was rolled back. And Pope Leo said that we all have stones that are blocking our entry into grace and into a happy and holy life, the stones of our sinfulness. And he pointed to the saints who were able to roll those stones back, but noted that not because they were great figures or they were somehow unattainable to us in their moral superiority, but because of their relationship and the grace of Jesus Christ that they were living in. And so I think to get the most out of Easter is to be mindful that God's love is first, grace is primary. This is a repeated emphasis of Pope Leo, but also that once we're living in grace and having received God's love, we are then empowered and enabled to live with a certain peace, serenity, and mercy for others, even though we might still have to struggle and might still be living in real struggle, real conflicts, both in our personal lives and our professions, in the world, or in the church.
Father Thomas Petri, thank you so much.
Thank you, Veronica. Good to see you.